Now for our next agenda item. How does the security rule apply to me? While the privacy rule covers PHI in any format, including electronic, paper, and oral, the security rule only covers electronic PHI, or ePHI. But in today's healthcare world, that's just about everything. It's electronic medical records, it's email, it's text, it's backup tapes. It's on local laptops, local servers, it's in the cloud, and it's sent over networks. It's on thumb drives, it's on CDs and DVDs and other storage media. It also can be on voicemail. It's when it's sitting in one location and when it's in transit, when you're carrying around your tablet or phone, or when it's on a thumb drive in your pocket. The security rule was designed to complement the privacy rule and to provide added levels of security to ePHI. It requires that covered entities and business associates implement standards to safeguard electronic protected health information. Some standards are required and the rule mandates implementation. Others are addressable, and covered entities and BAs have some discretion on how they will implement the standard. Of note is that addressable does not mean optional. Failure to meet the standard will result in a violation. An example of a required implementation specification has to do with workforce sanctions for violations. The rule says that covered entities must apply appropriate sanctions against workforce members who fail to comply with the security policies and procedures of the covered entity. The covered entity has to implement these policies and procedures, and if members of their workforce violate these, there has to be sanctions. For business associates, it could mean cancellation of your contract. An example of an addressable implementation specification has to do with workforce clearance procedures. As mentioned earlier, addressable does not mean optional. The requirement is still there, but the covered entity has discretion on how it will comply. Under the Workforce Clearance section, covered entities must implement procedures to determine that the access of a workforce member to ePHI is appropriate. Some may determine that background checks are necessary for everyone. Some may determine that background checks are only necessary for those with a certain level of access. Some may say they're not necessary at all. The procedures are required, but how this is done varies. Examples of other common safeguards that most covered entities will have in place include safeguards related to passwords, logins, downloading of software, safeguarding of devices including workstations, and reporting. For example, most covered entities will prohibit the sharing of usernames and passwords, and most will prohibit the use of shared or administrative login credentials. At UVM, we prohibit the sharing of login information, and our policy is that any activity that occurs under your username is your responsibility. This means that if you share your login credentials with someone and that person were to surf records out of curiosity, you will be held responsible for this activity. Along with UVM's policy prohibiting the sharing of passwords, we also do not allow the use of shared or general passwords for any systems containing protected or sensitive information. We also require that passwords for most systems contain the following. They must be at least 12 characters long, contain at least 2 types of characters, such as lowercase, uppercase, numbers, or symbols, and that passwords not be based on dictionary words. Given that the administrative, physical, and technical safeguards and the individual covered entity procedures can vary, it is important that you familiarize yourself with the policies and procedures of the covered entity. Ask questions if you're not sure. All covered entities are required to have a privacy officer. Find this individual and ask. You have now reached the end of this agenda item. Next up, what am I supposed to do?